Today on Co-op for Two, my top 10 tips for getting the most enjoyment out of the 7th Citadel. So this video is not going to be about overlooked rules or strategy tips. I've got separate videos on that, or about physical upgrades. I've got a separate video about that as well. This is going to be sort of some tips and suggestions for getting the most enjoyment out of the game. So number 10 is to play the threats in the recommended order, which is not laid out in the rule book, but is laid out by Serious Pulp on their website. You always play a new beginning to start each of your threats. Each threat book is like a campaign of 10 or so connected scenarios. So the authors recommend that you start with Dedekim's Awakening, finish that before moving on to Drums of Desolation, and then finally to the Kickstarter expansion threat, The Final Throne. You could do them in any order, but this one is the recommended order and the one that makes the most sense in terms of progression of difficulty and progression of lore. Tip number 9. When you purchase the 7th Citadel, you may get a bunch of different expansions. In general, you can just shuffle the cards from those expansions into the box of cards, and they won't affect your gameplay in any negative way. They might add new things you discover, but in general, they're made to balance out with the game. However, there is one exception, and that's On the Edge of Peril, this small little box expansion. The problem here is that this expansion does make the game more difficult and punishing, and so it is suggested that you not incorporate this right away. You may not ever want to incorporate this, but definitely don't shuffle it in when you first start playing the way you can with all the rest of the expansions. My number 8 tip is one that requires a little bit of effort, but that's to check the errata on the Serious Pulp website. There's actually quite a lot of errata fixes made to the game cards and the dialogue book and the threat books. And they're going to keep coming. They're at version 1.8 now as of April 2024, and they keep adding little tiny fixes. Now, almost all of them are small and not critical, but there are bound to be more serious ones uncovered as we go. Now, if we take a look at the errata posted, I want to walk you through it and give you a suggestion about how to handle it. So here's the errata 1.8, and the way it's listed is it tells you which card needs a fix, whether it's critical or not. So there are fixes to cards, and then fixes to threat booklets, fixes to the dialogue booklets, and then printable versions of the fixed cards. These are the skill cards, so I'm not spoiling anything by showing you this, but there are some fixes to some adventure cards as well. Some reprinted text for the dialogue books that got fixed and changed. Some reprinted text for the threat booklets that got fixed. So this is a little bit of a tricky situation. There's lots of little fixes. Most aren't important, but most of us care about these things. And then the question is, how do you incorporate these into your set of materials? You've got this big dialogue book. You've got these big threat booklets. Are you going to really reprint these big paragraphs, cut and paste them in, print out alternate versions of all these cards. Here they are. You remember they're adventure cards. Do you have a nice color printer on heavy stock? So let me give you a suggestion, my suggestion for how to handle this. If you're sleeving your action cards, as I do, so normally my action cards or my skill cards here are all sleeved, and you have easy access to a color printer, and you're going to sleeve the card anyway, then it is easy enough to print out a replacement card and sleeve it in. And when you're shuffling and operating, you won't even know that this has been fixed. And here's the fix. Okay. However, I don't recommend you go to the trouble of doing that for all of the terrain cards, all of the other 1,000+ cards, especially since I don't think you should bother sleeving all of those. You can see my DIY upgrade video for a discussion of that. So what is the answer then? Well, here's my suggestion to you. Let's imagine you weren't sleeving anything. Here's my suggestion for what to do with the cards, the adventure cards, the books, etc. Get yourself a pack of these removable little tiny stickers. Tiny little color-coded stickers you can get from Avery for a couple bucks, or you can find any other sticker that's well manufactured to be removable. And go to all the cards that are mentioned and all the booklet entries that are mentioned, for example here, and put a little sticker where there's an errata. And that's it. You can do that very quickly. It doesn't damage any of your materials. It doesn't require you to print out anything. Now, when you're playing, you don't have to remember this or search through this every card you pick up to see if there's some fix that's been made. But while you're playing, when you get to the odd occasional place that there's been an errata, then you know, okay, 144 in the dialogue book has been errated. Then you can go and look up what the fix was. And you might even use one color sticker to mean a non-critical errata, which almost all of them are, and a different color sticker to mean this is a very important errata. If you follow this suggestion, you can very quickly keep all of your materials marked so that you know when you have to refer to the errata printout booklet, but you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to print out any special material, cut it out, tape it in. It's a very convenient, non-destructive way, and then you don't have to worry anymore, and it won't affect any of your game materials, but you will be able to see when you rarely draw a card that does have an errata. My number 7 tip to maximizing your enjoyment with the 7th Citadel is to take notes. Now, the best thing you could do, actually, is take photographs of the map as you play a session. You'll play a session, at the end, you'll have to wipe it all clean. You'll have explored certain areas. You'll have put out lots of cards, or maybe if you rest or go somewhere, it'll tell you to clear the table. What I suggest is you take your cell phone camera or a nice camera, get a nice wide view of all of the entire map, and take a photograph each session. As you play the game, session after session, you'll be building up these little maps. And this is a big part of the 7th Citadel and the 7th continent, is exploring this world. And you'll remember, hey, we've been to someplace. The map is consistent across gameplays. And you'll often find yourself wondering, hey, how close are we to this area? Was that where this was? Was there something we saw that we didn't realize was important? Or was there a place we wanted to remember to go back to since we didn't explore? Having photographs of the map and the explored areas is absolutely a game changer. And I really suggest you get into the habit of doing that. In addition to the photographs, I suggest you keep a little notebook. Remember, this is a game you're going to be spending 100 hours plus on. Keep a little notebook dedicated to the game and write down a bunch of stuff as you play. There are a couple things that I would suggest you consider keeping track of. First of all, locations and cards you want to remember to come back to. You'll be playing a certain scenario, you'll get to some area, you'll say, we don't have time to do that, or this was interesting, we need to come back and check that out. I also keep track of what certain cards are. There's certain common cards here, like you get a certain card and it's a certain class of items. So I write that down so I remember. That way when we get to a point where it says you could do this or you could do this, we know, oh, I know what that means. Now we're going to get a weapon. Now we're going to get a bad poisoning or condition. So keeping track of what common cards, where you found certain cards in certain decks can be useful if you want to avoid or seek them out. Occasionally you'll talk to someone and they'll mention some piece of lore, some little detail, some legend. I suggest you write that down, keep track of it. You might use a Google Doc if there are a bunch of you playing and you don't want a dedicated physical notebook. And one more hint that I would suggest in terms of note-taking, which is a little different than this, is get yourself a little index card and keep track of all the things that you need to remember to do at the beginning of the preparation stage. As you play the game, you are going to be getting certain upgrades, building upgrades, and some of them need to be triggered at the start of each scenario, of subsequent scenarios. They're not in the normal rule books. You've added them because you've built them. Keep yourself a little card reminding you, here are the 4 extra things we need to remember to do at the beginning of each scenario. That will help you, keep you from forgetting. Tip number 5 for maximizing your enjoyment may sound a little obvious and silly, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway because it's something that I didn't realize until I'd been playing for a little bit. In the 7th Citadel and in the 7th Continent, one of the things that's a little bit annoying is that as you're playing the game, you're drawing all these cards and you're discarding these adventure cards, and they need to be sorted back into these card boxes sequentially. And it's a little bit of a pain at the beginning or end of each session having to sort all these cards back. And it's sort of what you might just do is grab the set of cards and grab each one and start sorting them back. It's actually much less efficient to do that. A much more efficient way to do it is to sort all your cards first into groups of hundreds. So all the 500s, 400s, 300s, 200s, 100s, do this first. You'll find that this is fairly quick to do. Once they're sorted into groups, you can sort each one very quickly. And so on. Okay, so you sort each group. And then, the trick is that makes all of this becomes manageable. Okay, so now you've got your sorted sets. Now you've got a completely sorted collection of cards to get filed back in. Putting this set of cards back in these boxes, because you can go sequentially, always moving forward, is a lot quicker than trying to file this set of cards when they're randomly ordered. My 4th tip for you for maximizing your enjoyment of the 7th Citadel is to consider using a variant rule or a house rule if there's a particular mechanic or rule in the 7th Citadel that causes you distress or that you find unpleasant. For me, there is one. It's a mechanic that's used often while you're playing to test whether a special action succeeds or fails. Frequently, while you're in this dialogue book interacting with someone, you'll be told to take out one of the 13, choose randomly one of the 13 cards, and half of these say you got lucky, it succeeds. Half of them say you got unlucky, it failed. It feels out of place and unpleasant and takes away from my enjoyment of the game. And so I, along with several others on the Board Game Geek variant subforum for the 7 Citadel, came up with a fix. It's a new building you can build as an option in one of your upgrades called the Fortune Teller's Hut. It basically lets you, when you draw a bad luck card, pay in a certain way to draw a new card. Very simple, very straightforward. It still costs enough that you might want to really consider whether you want to use it and build it. There's a version of it that someone made that is made to paste right in to the book of other building upgrades. But this is currently the only semi-official little variant upgrade. But there'll be more over time, and you may find one that makes a difference in your enjoyment, and maybe you'll even come up with your own. My tip number 3 is to do something that many of us serious board gamers are reluctant to do, which is play on an easier mode. So in the rule book, we're told about one official pair of variants you can play. Normally when you recover, you have to trade in a certain amount of health to recover certain cards. And there's 2 variants listed. One is story mode, which is basically a little bit easier. It's not as punishing to recover cards. And then there's a variant that's an even harder mode. Now, there are people on Board Game Geek posting that they're finding the game too easy. And then there are other people who are finding it too hard. And then there are others like me that are really in this game a little bit more for the exploration, still want the tension of the danger of a game, but want to do a little bit more exploring. And I would encourage you to consider playing on this easier mode if it increases your enjoyment. Don't get some idea in your head that we have to play the official normal way. Play the way that is more enjoyable for you, and you can shift in and out of the story mode. You could play in normal mode until you decide, okay, we're gonna die if we don't do it this way. These threats are long. They're multi-hour sessions and an entire campaign. If you die, you're supposed to restart. Experiment with these 2 modes. If you're finding the game too easy, play on survival mode. Make the game a little bit harder for you. Don't feel like these are these are cheating or not the real experience. Nothing about these changes the core experience of the game. My next little tip for you involves sorting and randomizing the exploration cards. So there's a big set of exploration cards in the 7th Citadel. When you enter a certain area, you'll be told to take a certain cards with certain numbers. These are all in group 1, and then there's group 2, and so on. And they all look the same on the front, but they have unique backs. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are stories. So when you're exploring, you're told, okay, put a 1 here and a 1 here, and then put a 2 here around some card. And the rules say, the idea is that every time you are to put one of these exploration cards out, you should pick them randomly from the set. And the only thing I'm suggesting here to consider is when you initially file these away, and if you have expansions, they'll get filed in here too. So it's important that you shuffle these groups in the beginning well. But my suggestion is that once you shuffle a group initially, like these ones, shuffle them, and then consider not taking from them randomly, but getting into a habit of taking from the front when you lay out. And when you discard, when you shuffle these back in, taking them, these will be shuffled in as a group at the end of your session. And then, after you take these discarded ones you've used, put them at the back and take from the front. The only thing this is going to do is give you a little less likelihood of repeat draws of cards you've seen, and a little more likelihood to eventually see all of these wondrous cards and things. It's a very minor thing, but it's just a way, if you're playing this for the exploration, for the discovery, it's a way to go through that in your first 80 hours rather than finishing the whole campaign and having certain cards you never saw. It adds a little more variety, reduces a little bit of the repetition. My final tip for getting the most enjoyment out of the 7 Citadel is to sort of embrace this as an exploration game. And that means you're obviously going to be playing strategically, optimizing your actions and your moves. But there are cases in this game where you're going to encounter something that you cannot beat, that you're going to lose, and you may even find yourself losing a scenario. Don't overly stress about losing one scenario in a campaign. The game is made to correct for that. It's not going to give you a terrible experience if you lose a particular scenario or if you can't get past a certain thing. And I would encourage you, while you're optimizing your actions, to sort of role play things a little bit. Role play your choices. If you encounter someone, or if you have a choice, do we want to explore this? I mean, indulge in your interest in exploring and discovering and learning about the world, even if it's at some cost to the optimization puzzle. Sometimes that's the better choice here. Don't overly stress about getting bad luck, having something bad happen to you. Try to embrace that as you're on an adventure and you're going to have stories to tell when you come home. And maybe their stories are about how miserable this one little adventure was. That's okay. So I hope there was something in there that's useful to you. You might also check out my video on top DIY upgrades and accessories, my video on strategy tips and overlooked rules, and of course, my long playthroughs of the 7 Citadel. I'd be happy for you to join us for one of those.